the thing with Buddhism is that it says there is no kingdom, there is no salvation, there is none of this stuff. The only thing that you can do is you can somehow learn to cessate the fire that burns through you, that drives you towards contributing towards samsara. Like a large part of you is made up of energy and the forces of the instincts that create samsara, that create hell. Like you are the demon in this world.
Yes.
You're the torturing soul. You're evil in that type of sense. And if you want to fix the world, if you want to make the world a better place, you need to detach, cessate, liberate, and let go of the whole thing and kind of step outside of it.
What's going on, everybody? In this episode, we have Uberboyo for the third time on the podcast. You know, as they say, third time's a charm. Now, I've always enjoyed our conversations in the past, and I think this time around we definitely went a bit deeper, especially when talking about, Christianity. I think at the start we were talking about the evolution of music and heavy metal, and then that naturally led into Satanism and what that is about, and just the archetype of Satan, Christianity, and also the anti-Christian behavior that's going on in pop culture right now, which is very, very interesting, even like psychologically speaking. And then we ended up going into Islam, religion, Jung, of course, and we ended off with nihilism and Neitzsche. And we're planning to continue our conversation about nihilism next time, but this episode is definitely a good prelude to that. So yeah, I'm sure you guys are gonna love it. I know that you guys love when Uberboyo comes on the channel. He has some very interesting insights, and yeah, I feel like kind of jamming out with him. We can go really heavy on these subject matters, but also have a laugh about it. You know what I mean? Like not take ourselves too seriously, and that's why I enjoy talking to people like him. And yeah, definitely check out his channel. And if you enjoy this podcast, you can go to iTunes and Spotify as well. Give us a review, leave a like, subscribe, share it with a mate. And of course, this podcast is completely sponsored by you guys over at patreon.com/yourmatetom. You guys make this all possible, and I truly appreciate it, because when I'm able to do this fan-funded, I don't have to worry about sponsors, and I can just freely and authentically speak whatever I want to speak about, you know what I mean, without having to avoid certain subject matters. So a huge thanks to all our legends over at Patreon, especially our top patrons, which you can see on the screen right now. But yeah, that's it, guys. Enjoy the podcast, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace. Oh,
I got it, Zoom. Thank you, Zoom. Thank you for the alerts.
Good to know, Zoom. But I used to play as a kid, and I'm very grateful for it. But I think as a kid, I didn't like classical music, so it was like a chore going to those lessons.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's always a problem, because as I've gotten older, I've grown to appreciate the grandeur of the classical pieces more and more and more. But as a kid, I was the same. I learned a bit of piano, and I was always sitting there and being like, what the hell is this stuff? And like, why am I learning? Why am I learning like what was the songs at the time I was listening to, like Busted, Year 3000 and stuff like this? And
what's that?
And I've been to the year 3000. It's like pop punk, that type of stuff. Green Day was another one.
Green Day was actually one of the first ones I learned. Oh yeah. An American idiot. Yeah.
How do I play that on piano? She's like, the teacher's like, shut the fuck up. What are you doing, you little rascal? On holiday.
Yeah. On holiday. Yeah. I used to, like, if my teacher taught me like video game music, mate, I would have never have stopped.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But then I got into like guitar, rock, Chili Peppers, Green Day, and then Metallica. It was more when metal came into my life, when that fire came alive,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Metallica,
I was
Trivium, Pantera, Machine Head, all these guys.
Yeah. I was a big fan of Chili Peppers. I never actually fully went tilt into metal, though I was always able to, like, sort of a distant metalhead, because I'd listen to the likes of Pantera and all that, and Trivium, and I could really get into it. I could be like, wow, this stuff is so it brings an energy. Like, there's nothing like metal on this fucking earth. There's it's so fucking crazy.
I know. Especially something like Trivium, they got like the harmonies, the melody, the song structure. It's very complex. It's actually I find that heavy metal music, it has a lot of roots in classical music. So because when I went back to classical music, I'm like, oh yeah, I can. I'm very grateful that I learned piano young, because I got my, my finger dexterity up, and I understood music theory and all that kind of stuff. So I was, dude, so grateful. And then I went back to piano kind of a few years ago, and it's good stuff.
Yeah, but metal is an incredible genre, because I guess the way I understand music history is you have basically Irish folk, or you could say Irish English folk in America, and then you have blues, like basically black blues music, or I think it was called ragtime back then, and they sort of merged to form into rock and roll, and then that becomes like the likes of Elvis and the Beatles and the 60s and all that stuff. And then towards the end of that, what happens is that the blues begins to get sheared out. The like, you could even say the black influence, but it wasn't necessarily seen that way, but the sort of blues harmonies and the blues rhythms and all that stuff begins to get sheared out. What happens is the music and of course the folk side of it gets sheared out as well. And what sort of happens is there's this takeoff towards like Black Sabbath, where they make an album that's almost exclusively a new thing. It's like rock exclusively, and it's actually got quite a lot of Satanism in it and stuff like this, like satanic influence in it. And then that evolves into the 70s and the 80s, where you basically get the likes of, I think they're called Judas Priest. What a fucking name.
Dude.
Judas Priest. And I think they're very, and there's
Rob Hadford, and he was gay as well. That was like so mind-blowing at that time. People loved him,
And it started to get, like, for example, Led Zeppelin brought in the whole mythology and bringing in Lord of the Rings and all this type of stuff. And then
Iron Maiden.
Iron Maiden, they're the ones I was thinking of, and it begins to form into this own genre where it stands sounding like nothing else. It's sort of space aged and like this very neo kind of crazy thing. And then of course it does begin to call back to classical music, because classical music is like very, very kind of, in its own way, very kind of space aged and alien or something like this.
Sorry, excuse me, this bastards. This is Felix. Say hi, everybody. This is
all right, mate. All right, Felix.
What's going on, mate? Yeah.
Dodgy cat.
He is a sneaky bastard.
So
those kangaroos, mate, they're up to no good.
Yeah, man. He's a kangaroo. He's a kangaroo spy. I bet you he's like a cat in a suit. He's actually a giant kangaroo underneath it. Tom, I have you, man. Yeah. But yeah, the sort of evolution of that stuff I find fascinating, and just kind of looking at where it goes, and it's just pretty cool stuff.
Definitely. And it kind of went down, like, obviously it depends on your taste in music, but then grunge came in the 90s, and then metal started to go down, because I was like a purist growing up, so I was like 24/7 just metal, and if it doesn't have guitar solos, it's not metal. I was like that kind of guy.
I even find that side of things really, really funny, in the sense of like us millennials will sit down, and I like, I've been through that stage. You become a classic rock purist or a classic metal purist, and it's like 40 years after the whole scene happened, and then we're just sitting there, it's like, oh, fucking grunge, disgusting.
That was the downfall of metal. I still have like a negative connotation to grunge now, just because I'm like tapping back to my teenage self. Now, I love pretty much all genres of music. As if it's good, it's good. Like, I think, and then with metal, I think like Trivium, Bullet for My Valentine, like that sort of generation, they kind of brought it back. And then now I find that, like, me and my friend will talk about this all the time. I feel like metal has died, man. Like, I can't even tell you the last new metal band that has changed the world, like a big name, like a Pantera or Metallica or a Trivium,
Yeah, it's actually a really cool conversation. Like, it's something I've always wanted to sit down and do on the channel. I just kind of never bothered to do it. But the story of music, like, it's incredible watching how history and all that stuff changes by looking through music. Because, for example, that transition into grunge in the 90s came with this massive cultural transition. There's a lot of things going on alongside of that were pretty huge deal. You could look at it like the sort of baby boomers in the 60s come up with, like, they're like the first generation to never have to fight a war, have absolute utter abundance, and be like a massive middle class. And then out of that comes basically hippie music, which is that they're all getting fucked out of their minds on drugs, and they're just fucking the shit out of each other, in like sexually. And then they're all just listening.
Sexually, like I had to put that in there.
The word fuck is just so dynamic. Like,
I know.
It can mean anything.
It's beautiful. Because if actually, when I have like foreigners, like, South Americans come to Australia and they learn the English language, they find the word fuck so like, wow, this is like the most diverse word in the universe. Like, you can just use it for anything, you know. There's a video on Osho breaking down on how many different ways you can use fuck, you know.
It's amazing.
Gotta check it out.
It's amazing. I hear that a lot. A lot of people, because you wouldn't realize it being like native. Maybe you just because of the Chichilian side of things that you'd maybe have a bit of a sus, but I wouldn't notice it at all. And then I think there was like a German girl I was talking to, and she was like, "Yeah, like English, the word fuck is incredible." I'm like, "What?" And is this girl coming on to me? Like, what's happening here? It's like, it's just so powerful. You can do so much with it. I love it. You know, I love it. And you're like, all right, fair enough. Yeah. So the cat's doing its rounds again. Love that post. Felix, take Tom's seat and we'll talk about metal. How about
maybe
that?
Actually I'll just put the keyboard away so that way we can step on whatever. Oh, it's playing the piano now.
That's the stuff. Play some trivia.
I'm turning this off.
But 100%. There was like looking at that sort of epoch of music history, and as I said, the boomers come in and they have the free love and the free sex and all this type of stuff, and the music is actually quite upbeat and all these type of things. And then as that begins to turn into the 70s, it starts to become more and more, you could call it decadent, like baroque. It's like, for example, the 70s rock was very ascendant and crazy. And then you have the 80s, which is just absolute, like the 80s is just so funny, man. Looking back at the 80s, looking at like Guns N' Roses are just like a case study in what the fuck is going on. Look at Slash, look at the way they dressed, look at the way they acted, look at the way they behaved. And then I think my favorite
very like theatrical, you know, like big, just And
the hair, man, like LA, it's just LA decadence and all this type of stuff. I think my favorite one of all has to be Motley Crue. And you like look at these guys, they're just they have a song where it's like it just starts off, apparently I think it's called Kickstart My Heart, and the guy who wrote the song was the bass player, I think, and he had a heart attack because he was taking so much heroin, and then they like gave him CPR and he woke up out of that, and then he wrote the song Kickstart My Heart, and it starts off something like, when I get high on speed.
Wow.
The whole song is just
speed was big in the 80s, eh?
100%.
I didn't live through the 80s, but that's what I hear anyway.
And what I find like so interesting is then the turn of the culture after the 80s, and like, you know, songs like Motley Crue is that you get grunge, and grunge is like super depressed, super slow, super down to earth, super.
I hate my father. Like yeah,
and like the
like nihilistic, very nihilistic, I feel.
And the icon of grunge, he doesn't die of a drug overdose, or like he doesn't die like fucking 27 prostitutes as strippers after a show or something like that. Instead, he dies by killing himself.
Yeah,
you know? Like,
dude. And he used a shotgun, didn't he?
Yeah, man. Well, yeah. Some say he was helped, but I'm not going to talk about that today.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to shut the window for a sec.
All good, man. All good. Yeah, and I feel like, but then where I feel like where metal went too far is like when it went too much into like the black metal, death metal, and it got too absurd, you know what I mean? Like too dark, where it became almost comical, you know, like pig squealed, you know, of what's that? Have you heard of that black metal band Mayhem? And what they
I have not, no.
The lead singer, this was back in the day, he killed himself in his hotel room, and then the band rocked up at the hotel room, and before calling the cops, they took photos of it, and then they used that photo as the next album cover.
Oh, they're fucking hell, man.
Yeah. It's like, all right, that's a little bit too far.
Yeah.
But these days, like I always appreciate metal, but I feel like these days I'm just a little bit more conscious of the lyrics that they say is all. I guess I'm turning into a bit of a prude, but at the same time it does, because even as a kid listening to that 24/7, for sure, I was a really angry kid, man. Like for real, like I was always like angry and depressed and had like these like almost demonic thoughts. And I'm not even just blaming it just on the metal music. That's definitely one factor of it, you know, drugs and all this kind of stuff. But it definitely affects your subconscious.
100% think so. And there's weird stuff about this. Like the more you look into this, the more you explore this realm of things. And I think music history is fascinating. And it's not all, I'm not trying to say it's all a conspiracy, but there's a very interesting project out there called Project Often, I think it is. I'll try to look it up. Project Often. Project, what's it called? Project MK Often. The goal was to test. Yeah, all right. This is fucked up, right? Project MKOFTEN was a covert U.S. Department of Defense program developed in conjunction with the CIA in 1966. In parallel with MK Ultra, to test the behavioral and toxicological effects of certain drugs on animals and humans, and some side effects was to explore the realm of black magic. The CIA recruited fortune tellers, palm readers, clairvoyants, astrologers, medium psychics, and all this type of stuff. And these guys worked with a lot of musicians apparently in order to experiment with like certain types of music and like see what it's like to introduce darkness into music and what type of effect it would have in the mind and all these type of things. I think they might have worked with I can't remember where I can't remember the exact details. So like, look, guys, you're gonna have to look this stuff out yourself. But I'm pretty sure they looked at some of those early metal bands. Like 1966 was around about that turning point where you're seeing the likes of very dark Black Sabbath come up and stuff like this, and
like Slayer. Do you reckon we're into it? That's pretty satanic.
I don't know at all, but that was the sort of rise of satanic music. Like before that, you didn't do that, you know. Like there was no ascendancy of. It was the '60s where a lot of this stuff started to come from. You had the free love movement, and like think about the Beatles, you know, love, 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 and then out of that comes the sort of Jungian opposite, where you have basically like Satan, 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 Satan,
yeah,
and all this like crazy shit popping.
And it's cool when you're an angry teenager. You're like, yeah, fuck yeah, man.
And it's super, super edgy. It's super edgy as well. Like there's it's weird. I don't know how to describe this because I have a song that I put up. I think it's called, I fucking forget the name of it, Black Soul or something like this. And it was me actually like kind of grabbing onto that type of energy because I kind of know like when you're listening to that, there's an energy you're getting into. It's an edgy, dangerous. It feels like, you know, you're sort of Denny's End of the dark world or something like that. And I remember making the song, and it was like I was sort of, you think of it in a Jungian sense, thinking about the shadow. And I recommend people check it out because it's weird. I made that song and it didn't feel like I made the song. Once it was done, it's different than other things I've done where I felt like I created it. It was like a thing living by itself. And I listened back over to it and I'm kind of thinking to myself, I don't know, bro, like that kind of feels like something that it's own thing, and the lyrics are really, really like dark and intense and all this type of stuff. And you really just wonder sometimes. You're kind of thinking to yourself, like, are you giving birth to the spirit or something like that, becoming a vessel for something more dangerous or something like that? And maybe that's what a lot of this music was doing. Like it's hard to know. So,
or even like a lot of gangster rap, man. Like it's like,
yeah,
when you really absorb the lyrics, it's like, whoa, this is horrible. Like it's just interesting how on YouTube it's so easy to get censored if you say horrible things, but if you say it in the form of music, then it's okay for some reason. You know, you can give Satan a lap dance and, you know, say all this demonic stuff and it'll get promoted on the front page.
It's actually like, it's a
crazy.
really interesting point. Maybe the right brain is able to say things the left brain cannot tolerate. So we could go with something like that. But that is very, very true. Like that's I don't know what to make it at. Like it's hard to know what to make it at. Like if you had your political opinion and made it as a rap song, would it get by? Like maybe probably not.
Yeah, right. And you would absorb it more because you're listening, like you said, you're activating your right brain, so you're absorbing that musical aspect, and then so the words are a lot more potent. You know, those 100%. Seeds sprout a lot easier. And it's interesting that you bring this up because yesterday I was watching this. I don't even know how, you know, one of those YouTube rabbit holes, but there was like this Satanist who eventually he converted into Catholicism, but his story was that he eventually became a high wizard or whatever the title was, and apparently there's only like less than 10 in the world, and he was meeting up with all these rock stars, movie stars, and doing magical spells, and they're, you know, really involved. Like whether you believe that or not, but I'm like I believe that because I've seen that dark world. There's definitely some dodgy shit going on there.
I've looked into it loads. Like there's this stuff it's so interesting. There's no clear, like for example, Led Zeppelin. I love the band. Jimmy Page was a huge Aleistor Crowley fan. Like he literally bought Aleister Crowley's house. Of course
he was.
Yeah,
do what thou wilt.
and he bought his apartment and used to go in there and do rituals and stuff like this. And he was a massive heroin addict and all this type of stuff. So his whole kind of back catalog with Led Zeppelin, like loads of it's involved with that whole magical thing and related to all this. And like, you know, Crowley, like what do you make of him? He's a fucking whack job in many different ways.
Yeah. And at the end of his life, didn't he say like, you know, like Satan get out or something like that? Like that's one of the rumors. I don't know if you, but you know, I feel like if you're going to dedicate your whole life doing black magic rituals and worshipping Satan, I can't see how you're going to be in a peaceful psychological state at the end of your life, you know?
it's a weird one. Like Crowley's a weird one because he's got actually quite a lot of reverie around him. He's got quite a lot of a celebration around it. Like magic in general is just such an interesting movement.
Yes.
But Crowley, like you look at him and he kind of made a really big name for himself, but I'm not sure if he was like really that successful. Like he basically he was a trust fund kid that went broke from like experimenting all these like really crazy niche things. He's like this crazy explorer running around Egypt doing all these spells and all this type of stuff.
Right.
But I don't know, like what did he exactly pull off? Like,
all right, ladies and gentlemen, we've gone through some technical difficulties, so I'll be playing some Zelda tunes as we wait for Uberboyo. Oh, hey, bro.
Sorry about that, man.
Sneaking up on me again.
Sneaking up, I was like, again. I'll just sit down. I might have a cigarette, just to give a bit of a listen here to what this lovely music. So, good stuff. Sorry about that, man. I'm pretty sure that was on my end, and the internet kind of is pretty bad. I'm actually in a different spot than I am usually. So if it kind of glitches, hopefully it'll only glitch for a moment, and we should be good rocking forward. So apologies about that, brother.
No, all good, man. All good. So what are we talking about? Aleistor Crowley, I'm pretty sure.
We're talking about Crowley and magic. So I guess that's really kind of the question. What would you like to talk about today? What you want to dive into? Do you want to get into Crowley magic and all that type of stuff? Maybe I can riff that in relationship to some of the things I know. But yeah, take the lead, man. There, tell me what you think.
I think because we started going this route, and this is very interesting, and this has been something I've been watching recently on YouTube about Satanism, and I know there's a lot of different sects of Satanism. Like there are the more secular ones who at the end of the day it's just about worshipping the self, do what thou wilt. But then there are the more kind of hardcore ones who do like blood sacrifices and really do worship the supernatural being Lucifer. So what do you know about it?
Oh dear, here we go. Well, I guess the kind of the story with me is that when I was younger, I was exploring like a lot of different stuff. So a lot of people know me because of Carl Jung. And actually, I learned about Carl Jung during a time when I learned about magic, chaos magic specifically. And a gentleman called Grant Morrison was one specific example of this. Now,
yes, I researched him as well. Interesting.
Yeah,
he's a comic book guy, right? Is that?
Yeah, he's the comic book guy.
Yeah.
He wrote Batman and all this type of stuff. It's good. Like it's really, really good stuff. Now, when I kind of look into this, what I would describe it as in the simplest level, because a lot of people have misconceptions about magic. You imagine those rituals and all that type of stuff as like being a big deal. It is. Some people actually do genuinely do that. And we could talk about that in the context maybe of like, I think actually probably one of the best descriptions of this I've ever heard was by Alex fucking Jones on some podcast with Andrew Schutz, I think his name is. Oh. And basically Alex Jones was saying that the way you could conceptualize, because this is the biggest problem for us moderns, is we can't conceptualize why rituals would happen and what this stuff means. Like it seems so absurd and stupid and pointless. Like we're enlightened, we're all enlightened, liberal, post-enlightenment thinkers and all this type of stuff. But Alex Jones was sort of saying it in the context of dimensional theory. So he basically says that a very, very, like a lot of scientists believe this, that we live in a universe that has more than 3 dimensions. So basically there's like 1 dimension, 2 dimension, 3 dimension. This is where me and Tom are sort of operant in 3-dimensional space. And then there's a sort of 4th dimension, which is the dimension of time. And then as you start to go up dimensions, there's more complex ways that you can kind of fold reality and change reality and all this. And there's this sort of suggestion that there are higher dimensions, and there's no reason to assume that there might not be some type of forces operant in there that are not operant in the third dimension. Like the way when you're on Earth, it's very obvious that you're walking around and you're dealing with certain forces, but when you're up in the air, like for example wind or maybe ultraviolet light, become an awful lot more serious forces to deal with up there. So you have to kind of change the way you orientate yourself up in the air. It's a different kind of world. Or when you're in the ocean, you know, it's a kind of a different world. And so Alex Jones would sort of suggest that there's a fifth dimension or a higher dimensional sphere, and it might be attuned to what we could understand as energy or psychic energy or the kind of electrical bolts that shoot through our bodies in order to kind of get everything sorted out. Maybe you could go down to Tesla route and like look into the ether and all these type of things, but we'll kind of leave that aside. I think we'll leave it up to people's imagination to figure out what that might be. But generally speaking, there's these kind of this higher space. There's this like creamy top on top of normal reality that has the ability to do things. And it's measured with like psyche, and it's measured with you could say the electrical impacts of emotions, if you want to think about it this way. And obviously one of the key emotions is pain. And so Alex Jones was suggesting that when someone does a sacrifice, so he kills an animal or a person, it's almost like they're going to the edge of the ocean. So they're going to the edge of the dimension, and they're cutting someone's throat and bleeding a load of blood into the ocean, and all these animals in the ocean will begin to taste or smell the blood inside the ocean and go towards it. So it's almost like a way, like if you wanted to get sharks to come towards you, bleed something out of your boat and the sharks will smell the blood and then come towards the boat and this type of thing. And so he's sort of suggesting that like sacrifices were along those lines, that you could go and sit down at the edge of these dimensions and do certain rituals, and it's almost like you're walking at the edge of the third dimension, and then the fifth dimension is like the ocean, and you're dropping stuff into the ocean and calling things coming, and things then show up in this type of regard. And of course Alex talks an awful lot about the experiments, like Terence McKenna talking about taking a fuckload of DMT and meeting the quote unquote elves.
When in doubt, double the dose.
Exactly that type of buzz, and
he speaks like an elf almost.
Well, he's a weird dude, man, because he would say stuff was like, and the mushroom began speaking to me, and I'm not too sure it left me, and all these type of things. Like you wonder how much Terence was literally influenced by that type of stuff. But that's 100%. Maybe
well, that's another topic for another day. We can get into that on another podcast. Yeah.
And this is well, maybe we get into this in this one, because Terence and Magick like do go together, but nonetheless, one of the big memes is of course the meeting the elves, meeting the entities, and it's cross-analyzed, where a lot of people say they meet this. Now maybe it's a cultural artifact we developed, but then you look back through history and you hear, like for example in Irish myth, they have the leprechauns, they have the elves, they have the fairies, is specifically what we call them, which were synonymous with the gods. And it kind of makes you think. It's like we're people all throughout history, all over the world, doing certain things, like getting blasted on certain types of hallucinogens and coming across these entities. And maybe the entities are a stable reality in another dimension or something. Like maybe they actually exist. And then the kind of question about stuff like ritual is that they would be processes or procedures to tell people maybe how to come in contact with these experiences. And we don't know what these experiences are. It's not out of this world to assume that maybe there is something to them. Like the elf thing is like a great example. And so one ritual, if you want to meet something quite weird, is like, grind up a certain tree and then boil it with a certain other leaf, and then you get DMT, ayahuasca, and then boom, you might meet the elves that way. And then another one is
witchcraft.
Maybe there's something.
It sounds like witchcraft to me. I've done this stuff, so like I understand it, but that's why I don't really play with it anymore.
And this is the kind of thing, is that it's like I think that's like that's boiling stuff in a cauldron to make shadows and entities and God knows what appear.
Invoking spirits and doing deals, and here I'll give you this sacrifice, whatever it is, and
and then you think about the sacrifice question, is that like it's hard to know, but like if you want to, maybe there's a ritual there that actually works, where if you want to talk to these guys, like aside from using drugs or maybe in combination with drugs, you can do certain things, like give them one of your best animals, and then they'll take that as a description of fidelity towards them or something like this. And maybe that's there, and maybe that's possible. And so I think when you start looking into magic with this perspective, you start to see an awful lot of that stuff make sense. Then the chaos magicians and all these guys, the modern magicians, if you will, they would actually brush a lot of that stuff aside because it's just too outside the modern paradigm. Some of them would explore it, but the main thing that they would talk about is the power of words and the power of conceptual stuff and the power of, you could say, the imagination, which is actually probably one of Magick's most interesting sides. Alan Moore, the guy who wrote V for Vendetta, the guy who wrote The Watchmen, he was a magician, and he would describe the actual art of storytelling as the art of magic. He would say that the like he has all sorts of interesting ones. For example, the word grimoire is the word grammar. To cast a spell is to spell out a word. To write, to create, to put in information into someone's mind and evoke their imagination is some type of magical power. Like, you can change the world with this.
Yeah,
and he vividly had experiences of having this stuff happen. For example, he would write out this story about this Guy Fawkes character in a sort of English trilogy where they're fighting against the system and all this type of stuff. And years later, the years after he writes V for Vendetta, he's looking on TV and there's a load of people in the anonymous movement showing up dressed like the characters he had in his thing. It was literally like he was saying, I wrote this spell, and years later, it actually came true. It actually was manifest, if you will. Now, that's a very fucking interesting idea, because he wrote this story and he created a reality. He changed the world in a very little way, and not in a necessarily controllable way. I'm not sure he was too happy with the anonymous movement, but he noted that it's like, I have the power to actually influence reality by the stories that I tell. And a lot of magicians notice this. They say that this is the kind of crux of it. Like, never mind kind of sacrificing babies or animals at the fifth dimensional ocean and talking to the elves and all this. This is probably one of the most interesting parts of it, is that you can sit down and create something, create a meme, create a mimetic system, create whatever it is you wish, and it'll have this rippling effect into reality, and it will actually change and bend the world. And if you were to be intentional and create stuff that favored you, maybe it would bend the world in your favor and have some type of influence in that type of regard. And this is where you start getting into the side of magic that's, like, I would describe it as very, very pragmatic, down to earth, practical and understandable, which is basically like, if you want to, you can. It's actually so similar to the law of attraction, people, where they sit down and they visualize the reality they want. Yes. And then it comes true. It becomes manifest. And the kind of funny thing that's very common with magic is that if you visualize the reality you want, you're going to get exactly what you want. So be careful, because if you ask, it's like, I want to have a 12-inch dick, just be careful, because you might get a 12-inch dick growing out of your face or something like that. Magic won't give you exactly what you want. It'll give you exactly what you ask.
Be careful what you wish for, right? That's where
careful what you wish for in that type of regard. So when I was looking through it, I was going through a lot of that stuff, because I was looking into fiction writing and I was looking into this, and Jung would have been vaguely associated with that, like dreams and all these type of things. Now, Jung's approach is slightly different. Jung would have an awful lot of conceptual advice for you to submit to your unconscious and your dreams, instead of being a willful creator, be more submissive to what the dreams tell you. But a lot more of the magicians like Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, the Chaos Magicians, even Aleistor Crowley, do as thou will, visualize, assert, inject your reality upon the world, and it will have an effect.
Do you think it's a coincidence that people who go like real far into this, like Satanists, they end up looking like villains? You know what I mean? Like, it physically changes the structure of their face. Where if you were to look at it, have no idea who they are, and you were to see like they're a character in a movie, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's the bad guy, kind of thing.
Yeah. So this is a good question, because on the surface level, this you could say this concept. Like, I have a story about this. When I was trying this, I believe this is real. When I was trying this,
me too.
I was like, this is. I've got to figure out a way. Let's get scientific about magic here, right? So I got to figure out a way to see if this is real or not. What I did is I looked up how to do a sigil. So a sigil is basically you get a piece of paper, you write out your wish, your desire, like law of attraction, and then you burn the piece of paper. And some people would masturbate in order to charge it with psychic energy.
Yes, I've heard of that.
I said, right.
Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I said I would try this, and this is kind of dangerous because you're not supposed to tempt the Lord. Let's put it this way. But I said I'll try this, see if it's real. So I looked up the most rare type of flower possible, and I found out that there's a blue rose, and blue roses almost never happen in nature. Very, very rare. So I said, all right, I made a sigil, which is basically like, if magic is real, I will get a blue rose. And I think I said within the next while or next year or next month or the next day or something like that. I can't remember the actual time thing, but something along those lines. And so I made the sigil and I did the whole thing, and then I burned it, and it was all sorted out, and it was cast in. And I went around the next day, and I went into like a shop, and I was like, "Do you have any blue roses?" And they're like, "No, what the fuck are you asking for? Get the fuck out!" And I was like, "All right, maybe it's not real." And then a couple of months down, I forgot about it, and I was like, "Oh, it's bullshit." All right, fine, cool, good stuff, good stuff. And then I was walking in the shop, a shop that I'd been to hundreds of times. I was walking in the shop then about a couple of months later. And I'd never been spoken to in that shop once by the staff. They'd never once said anything to me, bar at the till when I'm kind of chatting with them. But I was walking in the shop and suddenly I got this big tip on my shoulder. And I was like, what the fuck? So I spun around and it was a staff member. And the staff member was holding a blue fucking rose. And she was like, "Is this yours?" And I'm like, "What?" I
That's
froze.
scary, dude.
Yeah, man,
Wow.
I was like, "What the actual hell?" And for a second, I was like, "What's going on?" But then it clicked. I'm like, "Man," I was like, "What the hell? Maybe there's something to this shit." Oh my god.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So after this, I pondered. After this, I pondered because, like, I don't know, man. It's rare that there's a blue rose dropped in Little somewhere or something like this. Like that's a strange thing. All right. So I started to wonder, is there something to it? And then of course I started to look into the law of attraction. You could say the visualizing the reality you want and writing stories to
like
kind of suit
vision boards that would be related to this stuff, right?
100%. It's like the normie version of this, in my opinion.
Yeah, like
then,
level 1 of magic sort of thing. Like that's like the foundations.
And then what I started to notice with Jung, because I think Jung is actually a very interesting counterbalance to this, is that an awful lot of this stuff is very actively willed. So like will to power, I want to create this and all this type of stuff. And Jung would often say that he would often have his whole philosophy is a philosophy of submission. You must submit to the unconscious. Like the Red Book is a story of submission. He submits to his soul, his anima, and his anima becomes a sort of operant force that leads him. And what Jung was often saying is that you always have to understand that there's things inside of you. If you want to put it simply, like you've got your own psyche and unconscious and soul and reality. And in some sense, that's the thing that decides your destiny, not necessarily you. And so if you have you could say in the common parlance, maybe you have a trauma from childhood, or you went through a period when you're a teenager where you hated yourself and you caked in through trauma and pain a negative sense of yourself, a negative identity, or a bitter identity, or a resentful identity towards the world. And you saw the world as evil and mean, and you saw people as not respecting you and all this type of stuff. And it got buried deep down in all these different layers of your personality. And deep in your unconscious now, you have a sort of vision of yourself, if you will, that's not a good guy, or you're like the angsty teenager against the world. You're the rebel on the outside of society. And then you get a person like that, and you give them something like magic. And they then have this ability because they've now consolidated an ego. Now, remember, the unconscious stores all these memories and all this trauma and all this stuff in the body. And then your ego forms. And your ego forms as a reaction to what has happened to you down here. So, for example, if I was bullied as a teenager, I might form an ego or a persona or a character of being a tough guy. You often see stuff like this. And so it's like, Tom, don't fucking talk to me. I'm a tough guy. Be careful what you say to me, Tom. I'm a tough guy, all this type of stuff. But underneath the tough guy might be a sad guy or a lonely guy.
Yeah. Or even here, I've had those situations where you even just give eye contact to someone and they kind of look, did you just give me eye contact? That means you want to fight. What are you looking at? And it's like, whoa, I just glance, man. Like, yeah.
You have nice eyes. Like.
It's like an extreme version, but it's like, whoa, yeah. Yeah, you have nice eyes. Yeah, you're beautiful, man. I was just admiring.
But yeah, like 100%. And so, and that would be the sort of it. There's like there's something underneath the hood, And I'm not necessarily trying to subvert tough guys. Like you can be a genuine tough guy, and that's actually pretty cool sometimes. But anyway, you kind of get my point.
Yeah.
And so you consolidate this ego. And so you get this young guy who maybe has a lot of stuff he needs to sort out from his past. And in himself, and he needs to develop a vision of himself that's more positive, deep down, unconsciously, if you will, and relationship with the father and the mother and all this type of stuff. And you give him something like magic, and magic provides him, because he's in pain deep down. He doesn't like who he is. He doesn't like how people see him. He doesn't like his past. So he's in pain, and we all want to transform and escape that pain. We all want to transform and escape who we are to become someone better. And in many ways, better might mean live in a better reality, or maybe it's better and become a better person so that we can respect ourselves and all this.
Reclaim your power,
100%. And so these guys would come across something like magic, which genuinely looks like, you know, the Blue Rose story maybe means it's true. And they find this power, they find this tool that allows them to conduct their will, to execute their will upon the world and actually make stuff happen. In a
Harry Potter shit right there. Yeah.
Harry Potter shit is right. And then what happens is you give them this, and then it works, or there's something to it anyway, and it starts to give them an identity, and it gives them an identity of empowerment. They start to feel that they can do stuff. They start to feel competent. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, for example, if you find a guy who's getting bullied, like, it's nothing wrong with teaching him how to fight. That will give him an identity of empowerment and help him become better. But even if he learns how to fight, on some level, you're going to have to sit down with him and teach him how to overcome he's not a victim anymore. You have to like bring him back to the past and make him make peace with the fact that he was bullied. Even if he's able to fight, you have to do that, because he might turn into the tough guy who's like easily triggered, and now he's a dangerous tough guy because he's like out to fight the world, and he's actually just trying to beat up the guys who bullied him when he was like 14 or something.
Yes, like or at least not react with anger and hate in your heart. You know, I think that's like, there's a different way of approaching a fight. You know.
Yes. Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I'd love to kind of do a case study maybe on Conor McGregor. Maybe there's something like that going on there, because he seems like a little bit unhinged at the moment. But regardless of that, armchair fucking psychologist here. Regardless of that, you can imagine a dude who gets a hold of magic in the same type of way, and he's able to do all these cool things, and he's at the very least he's able to entertain himself and think that he's got power and think that he's doing stuff. And maybe deep down, if he's still got those issues that he's not confronting in the Jungian sense, they will start to bend the way he approaches this stuff, and so he'll start to get, you know, attracted to the idea of Satan, or attracted to the idea of these like negative ideas, like, you know,
Saruman sort of metal from Lord of the Rings.
100%. The Ring of Power. Like, I'm the eye. I'm the powerful one. And he starts to develop a sort of aura and love of the evil character, because the evil character is the one with power, and that's what he's looking for. He's looking to have that type of power. And then this kind of, you see this quite a lot then, is that people get into this stuff and they it's like this sort of, they bend towards these things. They're attracted towards these type of things because it gives them an interesting identity, an identity that they're intoxicated with. And it really makes you wonder, like, what's going on there? Like, is the answer for them maybe to go to the past and look through all this type of stuff and try to cleanse it out, instead of getting themselves entranced with the sort of romance of fucking Lucifer or something like this?
Yes, because it's luring at the beginning, but then I think a big problem is pride and kind of relying on your own will and thinking that, no, I'm never going to get corrupted by playing with fire, that kind of thing. And that's why Gandalf, even in Lord of the Rings, that's why, you know, when Frodo was giving him the ring, he's like, no, don't tempt me, Frodo, you know, because he knows, even though he's a powerful wizard, he doesn't understand this unknown magical principle. So even he's like, nah, I'm not going to touch it because I know it's going to consume me, right? He's not relying on his own will. Even Saruman, actually, there's a video on the actor of Saruman, Christopher Lee, and he got asked about a question about the occult and magic and all that kind of stuff, and his face just like, trust me, don't get into this kind of stuff. You're opening doors that you don't want to open.
I have met people who claimed to be Satanists, who claimed to be involved with black magic, who claimed that they not only knew a lot about it, but as I said, I've certainly never been involved, and I warn all of you, never, never, never. You will not only lose your mind, you lose your soul.
Right, he kind of gave this very ominous kind of response. And that's where my instinct came, because like I was playing with this stuff. I didn't go too far into it because I just knew, like, my instinct told me, like, yeah, this is, I don't know, I just felt something that maybe you're opening some sort of portals, or I don't know, it just didn't sit right with me. So I left it alone and stopped playing with that kind of stuff. And
yeah, and it's
I get it though. I get the allure for sure. But do you believe that there is a heavy price to go into this world, this occult magic, doing all this kind of stuff?
I would look at it like the price of violence, and like I would look at it in the context of fighting. So, for example, exact same principle. You can be a victim when you're younger and get bullied, and then someone can take you and empower you and teach you to fight. And the Cus D'Amato, the guy who trained Mike Tyson, or John Kavanagh, the guy who trained Conor McGregor, like these guys pick up these poor kids who were having a hard time and had a violent edge to them, and they train them. And actually, a huge amount of their training is to teach them to use their mind properly. And oftentimes, what you need to do is teach them to kind of confront their past. And then you give them power, and a large amount of it is teaching them how to then wield that power with nobility and correctly, and in a way that is just proper, because if you teach a young man how to use his fists, like, he can kill people. He gets to the point where you could just walk into a bar if you wanted and just pick out someone and just be like, I'm going to murder that guy and hold him down and beat him to death. Like,
same with money,
possible.
right? Like, if you give some young like if you gave my 17-year-old $1 million, that would not have ended well, So
yeah, 100%.
But at that time, but you have that pride of thinking like, no, I can handle it. You know what I mean? But the point is that you can't, and that's when you rely on your own will, because we're fallible by nature. You know what I mean? We're always going to fall over. So, and it depends on what approach you want to take this. But yeah,
it's a careful balancing act, because fundamentally, like, you do have to make decisions to become a man, to become a responsible person. You have to learn how to make decisions on your own feet, take authority, and assert your will. You need to learn that. But then there always has to be the context and the balancing of like what that means and how you do that properly and where that goes. And so with someone like Conor McGregor or Mike Tyson, they're great examples, because those guys spiraled and fucked up quite majorly. Like, they had serious public life implosions when you kind of look at what happened.
The Great Fall.
The great fall. Mike was a great example, like, really dangerous, like this just aura of like pure power. And
even the way he walks, like, and
his shit. He was so scary for people. Like, everybody would look at him and be like, especially towards his peak, people would be like, Mike is going to eat that guy. He's like a lion eating a gazelle in those fucking rings and all this type of stuff. And then as he started to ascend, basically, I think he changed coaches. His coach died, and he got on board with Don King, and Don King was like proper promoter, moneymaker, and all this stuff. And Mike, oh damn, testing. Hello.
Yep. I think that's from your computer, Mike.
Yeah,
that's
should be back online.
Yeah. All good.
I slapped the cord. I was there. Give the cord a flick. But he spiraled, and he went for an implosion, a very public one, and you can look at it. And then he comes out afterwards. It's just so fascinating. Conor did the same thing. He goes for this massive implosion. He shows up early on. He's like this witty, kind of dodgy Irish guy who's like coming out with these like sharp, kind of stinging insults. But you can see that he's got kind of a good sport underneath him, and he's up for like succeeding and all this type of stuff. And then Conor shows up with Khabib, and suddenly the energy's changed massively, and Conor's like blatantly being rude and like blatantly being he like looks sort of on tilt. Same there in the last fight,
like mocking his religion, like he knows he doesn't drink alcohol. He's like, here, drink, come on. You're like, all this kind of stuff.
And stuff like this. And it's not as funny, like it's not as kind of witty and humorous and engaging. It's got a different tone to it or something like this. And then the same sort of with Mike. Mike ascends, and then suddenly, like, he's no longer the indomitable Mike. He's like crazy Mike is what people call it. He starts biting people's ears off and stuff like this. And they get to this high point, if you will. And this is the point where their will isn't able to tame. It's unable to be controlled. And they spiral. They go off the rails. They lose the virtues that kept them tamed. Their coaches can't control them anymore. And they have a massive implosion. And then, for example, Conor gets massively humbled by Khabib, shows up again as like this nice, humble guy. And same with Mike. Mike had this massive implosion. All these terrible things went wrong. And you listen to Mike now, and like Mike's, got a huge amount of humility, and you can see he got stung really, really badly and all these types of things.
I think that's even where God can come in, you know what I mean? That to humble you instead of, because a lot of these, when you grow your pride to that massive level and you think you're God, again, that's the archetype of Lucifer, right? Like Satanism, but just painted in a different way, of course. Where you
and Jung was talking about this in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He was doing a seminar on this, and he noticed that in tribal, because when Jung went down to Africa, he noticed in tribes that after a warrior would go out and fight one-on-one against another warrior and kill the warrior, he would come back into the tribe, and the tribe would say that he's like magic. And first of all, they'd take his sword off him, and they'd consider his sword dangerous. So they'd isolate the sword because it's this magic sword that has got the power of life and death in it. And so they're all terrified of the sword, first of all. Second of all, they would banish the guy to the top of the mountain or in a cave or something like that. And they'd only feed him like grass or something for like 4 or 5 days or maybe longer, to make him deflate. Damn. Because when he comes back in, he's like, big dick energy, walking in, be like, I killed him, man, I'm invincible, I'm a fucking badass and all this. And so they need to bring him down. Yeah. I'm a god.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up this point, because I think it's very important to have a good group around you because I feel like good friends always call you out on your bullshit. If you are getting inflated, or if you start spreading wacky ideas, instead of having a bunch of yes men, like, yes, you're right, or just kind of being in this echo chamber of what you want to hear, this kind of self-masturbatory kind of state. Instead, it's good to have friends or mentors, who will kind of tell you the truth. Like, if you're kind of going too inflated, a good friend will tell you, like, hey, dude, you got some shit on your face, you might want to wipe that off, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's gold. Even that though is just hard, because it's hard. Like, for example, say you're Conor McGregor's friend, and Conor is after becoming world champion, on his way to become a billionaire, can beat up anybody. And at that point, like, you could try be his old friend and say it to him, but he wouldn't be Conor McGregor that you knew when you were younger. He would come across as possessed by a new energy, like he's possessed by the force of God and all this stuff. So you'd be like, Conor, you're kind of losing the run of yourself. You're not the same guy. And he'd be like, yeah, man, of course I'm not the same guy. I'm now the fucking champion of the world. I'm not who I was. And then he'd, see all your flaws, and he'd be like, yeah, you're just like, you never really amounted to anything. Why the fuck should I listen to you? And then he'd offend you, and then you'd kind of break away from it. And you try to, you can't fight him. Like, you're not going to fight Conor McGregor. So it is very, very hard. And they sort of tune out their friends. And that's a very, very hard thing. It's a very, very hard thing. And John Kavanagh, Conor's coach, specifically said this. He said that, Conor beat Aldo, so Conor had gone up here, knocked out Aldo in one punch, and then he went off and he lost to Nate Diaz. And John was saying after this, it's like, after Conor beat Aldo, like, it was kind of hard for me to coach him. Like, I what am I going to do? Walk into the world fucking champion and tell him what to do? Like, this guy was on top of the world. Like, he was beyond me. Like, I felt intimidated by him. I felt intimidated by his competence, his aura. Like, it felt like he was better to me. And it's difficult. Like, you kind of get it. You would, it's easy to say, John, you should have been more harsh and you should have done all this. But in the actual experience of it, like, what are you going to do? Turn around to the guy who just, took over the world and tried to take him down a peg? And he would give you that look and be like, why the fuck should I listen to you? Why should I listen to you? And you can only hope. The only thing that would work is that if Conor has the humility to give you the permission to be the dominatrix over him, like, that's really the only thing that can work in that context. And it has to be a sort of permission thing, and it has to be in Conor in a large extent. And so this is why it's the humility virtue is such a big deal, So it's a hard problem. And I guess the kind of thing with stuff like magic is it's the exact same principles. It's operantly gaining these interesting powers, such as the ability to sit down and create culture, and that has influence on the world. And then you have to ask yourself, like, how do you know the culture you create and the will that you want will be a positive one? How do you know that you know what you want? Because that's always the story with magic. Careful what you wish for. How do you know what you want? You will get exactly what you ask for, but you don't know what you're asking for. Always be careful with your words. Always be careful of how you spell, with your grammar. Yes. All these things matter, because if you have a load of bullshit going on inside you, Jungian style, and you formulate your will and write your will to power out and ask for something, you'll get exactly what you ask for, but it might be the worst thing of all, because you're not in the right headspace. You're in that, you're like, like, you could say, like, I can imagine a magician who grows up, becomes edgy, has Christian parents who were like putting him down and always telling him to be humble, and he was getting bullied in school, and humility wasn't the thing he needed violence. And then he grows up and he discovers magic, and magic feels like power. And then he turns around and he associates that with the opposite of his parents, because of deep down emotionally he's angry at them. Yes, he chooses Satan. And then he says, he sits down there one day and does a fucking, like, pentagram ritual in his fucking room with candles and all this shit and incense, and says, make me Satan's disciple or something like that. And you don't fucking know what you're doing there, man. You can see how he could get to that point.
Rebellion against the father. Yeah.
And maybe it would work. Maybe Satan would show up and be like, nice, right? I'll give you the power. But, like, you've said you want to be my disciple, and power's disciple is,
but then some people get so fooled into that, thinking like, I'm, Satan likes me, but it's like, Satan's a liar. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't give a shit about you. He's just going to say whatever he needs to say to get you on that path. And you hear that a lot. Again, that's why it's interesting watching, instead of listening to a Satanist who's just getting into it, listen to a Satanist who's been on that path for like 20 years. You know what I mean? Like see the long-term fruits, what's coming out of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually, it's quite interesting. Like I think Satan's original meaning was adversary.
Yes.
I'm not too sure. And he was actually, I think adversary comes from an old role in courtrooms. So you had a guy who was basically like the quote unquote devil's advocate. He was like the opposite guy. He was the bullshit caller outer. He was the guy who kind of went against and all this stuff.
Like the opposite of Christ, right? Well, but then if Christ represents truth and wisdom and he's the adversary of that, then wouldn't that just be anti-truth by definition?
So with Christianity, yes, that's the way it gets framed. But I think older than that, it's slightly, well, yeah, it's just an interesting one. So in the past, you have God, and so the older context before Christ was you have God, and then it's almost like the advisor God has who calls God out on his bullshit. It seems to be Satan. For example, in the book of Job,
yes,
you have Job, and Jung talked about this. This is a weird book because you have Job, and Job's a good dude. And then you have this sort of advisor in the court of heaven, who is Satan, who's Satan, the adversary. And he says to God, it's like Job doesn't really love you. And so God starts to do some fucked up like voodoo doll shit to Job. He starts to torture him and fuck with him and play around with him and all this type of stuff. And it's sort of like, bro, like you're giving Job a pretty hard time to prove a point here. Like, what the fuck? This is horrible. And Satan kind of goads him on. Satan is kind of saying, listen, well, like, here's the opposite perspective. Here's the kind of take and all this type of stuff. And Satan's a very neutral character there. He's not necessarily like toned with evil. He's toned with, he's got sinister tones, certainly, but it's a different vibe. And then when Christ shows up, Christ is a fascinating kind of evolution of that because Christ represents absolute good, like absolute perfection.
Yes,
the
mediator. It's like the mediator between God and humans, and he was so humble, man. You know what I mean? Like he was. Yes. He grew up in like poor areas, and
100%. And it's just so like it's goodness personified. Like this is what I find very, very interesting about like you could even say stuff like the Satanists and all this is that it's interesting. Like I'd be Nietzschean, so I'm not sure. I have my wonderings and ponderings and critiques of Christianity, but to hate Jesus is like kind of a strange thing because Jesus is just like a good guy. Like he's not like a bad guy on any level. At the very, very least, he's someone with a pretty solid heart. And he sort of represents that. He represents like just purity of heart and feeling good. And you notice that that's what riles people up. People don't want to believe that you can be good. People don't want to believe you can be pure. People don't want to believe you can have good intentions. They want to believe that there's darkness. They want to believe that there's sinister intentions or a sort of a secreted bad intention and all that. Or
like a justification to sin. You know what I mean? Like it's okay if I just masturbate to porn every day and eat junk food and do drugs and drink. Like so what? What's the big deal? And this is specifically what I mean by that is that like we all have those urges in us, 100%. I'm a sinful dude, man, so I'm not gonna be like, oh, holier than thou. Like I get it, but it's just when you frame it as, oh no, but this is good, that's when I start to have a problem with it.
And that's quite interesting. Yes, absolutely. And so we all have those urges inside of us, and they we fail with them often. Yes. And what Christ sort of symbolizes is he's the offering of a suggestion of like, this is someone who is pure, who's someone who really, really has good energy and has overcome many of these addictions. And I meet loads of people like this, and has overcome the worst in them and allowed the best in them to thrive. And
you watch them like long term because like some people have like a life-changing, let's say, spiritual experience, but then 6 months later they're right back where they started. But I've seen a lot of these people who've gone harrowing stories, man. Like like you can't even imagine how horrific some of these dark paths people go down, and they have like this Christ experience, and it's like long term. They're still good. They still have peace in their heart, and it's like it's amazing. Just from like an outsider view, it's like wow, really that it actually works.
And this is sort of related to this magic thing. So I'm trying to make 7 points here. So I'm going to actually tag that one because that's such an interesting thing to talk about.
7 Hermetic laws. Yeah.
The 7 Hermetic laws is right. We have the Christ. So the Christ question, and so for example, Christ represents that purity, and then of course the Satan, the adversary to this. So when Christ shows up in the story, the adversary to this is a very, very strong swing towards you could say the Antichrist or the opposite of that purity. So it's by definition impurity. And this is where Satan starts to take on the tone of absolute evil and extreme evil, and an awful lot more. He becomes an awful lot more black instead of like
inverting
gray.
everything, right? So like instead of having symbolic truth, he dismantles that symbolism. That's why always changing the meanings of words and confusion and chaos and disruption, all that kind of stuff.
He starts to take an awful lot more of that sort of body of like absent of the opposite adversary, going against all these type of things. And that's a slightly different tone, it seems. It's a weirder tone. It's a stranger character, if you want to think about it this way. And that just sort of relates to what I was talking about earlier in regards to like Job and God and sort of why people kind of get into, you could say, Satanism and all this, because it literally is like a just like the way a teenager, because their parents are Christian, they become edgy in that intention. And then when you're
me too, man. I was like, Christianity was the one religion which I hated the most, and I find that very interesting. Something that I've noticed even like within New Age spirituality, every single religion is accepted except for like traditional Orthodox Christianity. And I was like, and that kind of like that curiosity, I'm like, I wonder why. So then I just went, I kind of delved into it myself, and it makes sense.
And it's quite interesting. And I like, in a Jungian sense, I would sort of suggest, like Christianity is this sort of standardized Western religion.
Right.
And an awful lot of this stuff is reactionary against that. As opposed
and to be fair, just for the audience as well, because I do believe that Christianity, like especially like in the 19th, 20th century, man, there's been such poor representatives of Christianity, and then it kind of devolved into like Protestant Christianity and all these different denominations. So I think when a lot of people have that aversion towards Christians because you've met that that classic fundamental Baptist Christian who's like super judgmental, and it kind of turns you off. You associate that with Christianity. You know what I mean?
Yes, 100%. And
so I get it. I 100% get it. I hated it too.
I think in the broader sphere, like what I see is it like, if you want to look at the West as like a teenager, the teenager was Christian up to this certain point, and now it's going through a stage of reactionary rebellion where it's trying to find a new identity, and that's actually a very interesting problem, because you can't just, this is a Jung 101, you can't just throw out the past. You can't just, as much as you try to get rid of Christianity, you will only ever be in juxtaposition to it. You'll only ever be in a reaction to it. You either digest it, accept it, and overcome it, or you perpetually try to rebel against it, literally as the Antichrist.
Throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That's exactly 100%. What it is. And it has a lot of good stuff, because like you look at even like, I'm not necessarily agree with Catholicism, but there's also been, they've done horrible things for sure. There's no denying that. Humans have, it's every culture, every community, every religion, every country, we've all done horrible shit, but it doesn't mean that you should just abandon your nation and your community. But there's something interesting is that, like even the Catholic Church, they brought scientific knowledge, and they built the first universities, they abolished slavery, they, had the first adoption center, and all these amazing things that we just kind of take for granted. And I'm not here to say therefore it's good, but it kind of just gets ignored. You only look at, but what about the Inquisition or whatever it is, or the bigotry, the homophobia, et cetera.
Yeah, 100%. Like, if you actually study Catholicism, it's literally, because a lot of these people would be like, you call them liberals if you want to think about it this way, or liberal leaning.
Yes.
The Catholic Church is literally like the biggest left wing institution that has ever lived, supporting the poor against the kings, supporting the poor against armies, unnecessary. Like, it obviously had its bad sides, but
that's humanity. But that's humanity. That's not like Christianity. You know what I mean? Like, but what about these Christians who killed people? It's like, but they obviously weren't following their religion, thou shalt not kill, love your enemies and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot we can get into. It's a complicated subject, but it's just something that I've noticed within myself, and
I think it's a fascinating subject in the kind of broader perspective, because we talked about this before. You have the Jungian thing, like you have an identity as a kid, if you want to think about it this way, and then you go to school and that identity gets destroyed, and then sort of late teens, early 20s, you need to discover and create a new identity. And often the problem with
you being a teenager is that you react against the identity your parents gave you. You try to create a new one, especially if your identity has gone wrong. If if things have worked out for you, you might just stick with your identity and be, that'll be the type of person who'll be the same person from when they're a young person all the way up until they're like 20s. You meet people like that a lot. But some people don't. Some people become a teenager and they get bullied or they get ostracized or they discover a new world that their parents didn't show them, and they start to create and look for a new way of being. And what they do is they, as I said, form a reaction against the past. So they define themselves as opposite to their parents, as opposed to being a first principle, an axiom, a new thing to themselves.
They're removing the foundation, right? And then we kind of get into nihilism and we fall into the abyss. And then, the abandonment of logic and all this kind of stuff. Are you familiar with Father Seraphim Rose? He wrote a book on nihilism, which is, I think you'd really, really enjoy that.
I'll check it out. I am not at all. Father
Seraphim Rose. He also wrote Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, which is absolutely fat. This was written in the 70s, and everything that he's talking about is like, dude, this is bang on exactly what's happening right now. And he's an Orthodox monk. He was a Hindu for about 20 years. I think he was he was a Hindu for 20 years, and then he ended up going to Orthodox Christianity.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of Orthodox going on at the moment.
It's coming back. Well, that's where I've went to liturgy like for the first time a month ago and kind of been going. Yeah, it's been really interesting. Bad. Yeah. And no one in my family is like, there's literally not one person in my entire family who's even been to an Orthodox church. So I'm definitely the first.
We should definitely have a chat about that in a bit. There's just one thing I want to talk about with Christ and all that stuff.
Yeah, sorry. And just because I actually want to know, like, I wonder what the early church fathers' perspective is on the Book of Job, because I'm familiar with the story. I just don't know, like, what's the explanation of this, because there are certain stories in the Old Testament where I'm still trying to reconcile. I'm like, hang on a sec. Yeah, it's a bit weird, but it's also, once I look at the Old Testament with the lens of Christ, he's all over that, man. There's like so many prophecies and like you see the patterns, it's like even Genesis, like I kind of look at it as a fractal pattern that repeats throughout all human history, but in just different ways,
I think
anyway, go on.
Isaiah's pretty cool as well. Because
Isaiah 53, dude, if that's not a freaking exact description of the coming of Christ, I don't know what is, man. And I'm pretty sure even a lot of the synagogues, they remove that chapter from the Torah.
Really?
Yeah. I've heard that. I don't want to confirm, so I don't want to just spread hearsay, but I have heard that, because if you read Isaiah 53, those who are interested at home, read that shit and tell me that is not an exact description of Christ in like uncanny ways. It's mind blowing. And that was written like 700 years. Well, I don't even know how many, but many of hundreds of years before the coming of Christ. So
Isaiah 53 is exactly what Jung puts at the start of the Red Book. That's
really
interesting.
Wow.
That's the quote. He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of the dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire. He was despised, rejected by mankind, a man of sorrow and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised and we held him in low esteem. Yeah, man, it's nuts. Surely he took up pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced. Transgressions.
And he was literally pierced, bro, by a spear. Yeah.
The punishment that brought us peace was on him. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him.
Yeah.
And by his wounds, we are healed. We, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned away, and the Lord has laid upon him the inquiry of us all. That, man, it's fucking...
It even says that he gets buried in the rich man's tomb. All right. Okay, we're back. Yeah, it even says in that, I'm pretty sure later in that passage, that he gets buried in a rich man's tomb, and even kind of alludes to the good thief and the bad thief that he gets crucified with, like that kind of stuff. Awesome. It's mind blowing. How do you explain that, man? Like when you read something like that, you're like, what? Amazing.
I'm gonna give it a whack in a second, talk about that, because that's a really cool topic. I'm gonna just first review back to the Christ thing and talk about the sort of what you notice All right, so in the Jungian sense, like why Christianity makes sense, and if you want at the end of it we can talk about like anti-Christian stuff, so we can just get the full picture if maybe your audience wants it. But I'll talk to you about because you said earlier you notice people who embrace Christ and then years down the road they're in a good place. And
Yes.
it's kind of like that thing I was talking about. You know, the West right now is like a teenager whose identity is breaking down, and they're forming a reactionary identity against their parents. So, you know, all the New Age movements you go into, and then all the Satanist movement, and that you go into the liberal atheist movements, and it's like, oh, Buddhism's kind of cool, and all this type of stuff. But the ones that they're really, really against are Christianity and maybe Islam to a lesser extent. But they certainly have their problems with Islam, which is coherent, I guess. But
well, this is what I think I'd mentioned to you last time, but it happened again. I'm not going to address it right now because it's a deep topic, and man, there's so many topics that we can go down. But you know, interviewing a Christian, and then I get called out for being a bigot and a homophobe and all this kind of stuff. But even though we didn't even mention the word homosexuality, like we didn't even talk about that. It was purely just about New Age spirituality. But my point is that if I was to interview a Muslim, there is no way that video would exist, because you'd be Islamophobic, right? But there is no Christianophobia. So it's like, but in Islam, they'll kill you for that stuff. Whereas the Christian way is to love you, like, you know what I mean? It's not that certain sinners get kind of singled out, because the point is we're all sinners. I'm just as much of a sinner as anyone else. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
from that perspective.
We could talk about that in maybe later as like quite an edgy conversation. Because,
well, maybe we'll just leave it. We'll leave it at that, because it's I think we'll just keep going.
Get us in trouble.
Well, it's not even about getting in trouble. It's just something that I'm still exploring myself, and I did look at this as an opportunity to look at my blind spots and learn more about it, for sure. But. Well,
we can talk about that. We'll pop into that later. But where was it sort of going? Yeah, you have that reactionary identity, and you see that all over the place. And like, it's actually crazy. Like, people will base lives on behaviors that are just like by definition just anti-Christian. You know, like they want to just do everything the opposite of what they were traditionally told to do, which is actually fascinating, because it's just a completely reactionary personality. And that's you know, you have to look at that and be like, look, that's not standing on your own feet and operating from first principles. And of course you can do that. You can be anti-Christian and create a worldview on first principle that is separate from it. Like Nietzsche, I think, quite successfully did that. We can talk about that later.
Actually, Nietzsche was one of the main topics I wanted to talk to you about before we started this podcast, but I love where it went, man. So we can all, you know,
we'll get into it. Nietzsche's a fucking great topic. And so what you notice then is that when people, as I said, you'll kind of get that archetype of someone who's got a wounded soul, a wounded heart, a wounded unconscious, a wounded psyche, and they need to fix that fundamental identity. And then they come across something like magic or something like this that teaches them power, and then they begin to play around with this, and it gives them a new identity. And of course, because they haven't healed the stuff from the past, they form this new reactionary identity and become a Satanist or a New Age anti-Christian something. Or something.
And just so, like, if someone has I'm always open. You know, if you've followed my journey throughout this channel, I'm always like getting people from different perspectives. I'm a very open guy. Like I'm quite reasonable. I like to believe. And if you have some sort of an issue, email me, message me. I feel like if you go straight to slander, it's like, whoa, dude, you could have talked to me. You know what I mean? That's why I don't want to play into that game. That's why I don't name any names. And my first reaction is like, oh, you know what I mean? It's like anger, but then it's like, nah, like what you're talking about, the wounded psyche and all that kind of stuff. So all you can do, like I guess the Christian thing to do would just to send love and forgiveness, and you know, hopefully
and this is like Jung. Like Jung spoke this way. So anybody who's interested in someone like Jung, they should definitely check out what he talks about this, because then you have that same sort of question about maybe you've got a wounded psyche or something like this, and you need to choose an identity. You need to choose who you're going to be. And of course, there's sort of laws to our nature. Like you need to choose certain virtues to do well in this world. You're going to need a bit of humility. Like we said with Conor McGregor and Mike Tyson, like humility would have served them well if you could install that virtue in their heads. But it's very, very fucking hard when these guys are on top of the world.
And pride, all comes back to pride.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And if you have this image in your head, if you have this identity really deeply imprinted in you that you accept and you embrace and you fully are congruent with, that is encouraging humility and encouraging action and encouraging like good, like, you know, assertive behavior towards your purpose, and encouraging honest speech and truthful speech and being sincere and going for stuff and all this. If you get that identity installed properly, as say before you become world champion or something like this, you might even handle that really, really, really well. And you see this, for example, with people who embrace Christ, because Christ has quite a lot of those virtues just installed in him naturally. And Jung would talk about this. Christ is a symbol of what we call the self. Christ is a very basic Western symbol of how we should see ourselves on the most fundamental level.
It started off Eastern, to be fair.
But
I know you're saying that,
100%. And the main thing is that sort of idea of like within him we get access to these universal principles. This is sort of like a very Jordan
well, even the Orthodox perspective, from what I understand so far, is that all these virtues ultimately come from Christ. Anything good that comes from you, you're just channeling that. You're just allowing that to flow through you.
And that's such important language, allowing it to flow through you, because this is precisely it. Like Christ as a symbol it like lives, and he's eternal, and the principles that he represents are built into him. He's like a messianic religious figure, and
these uncreated energies, right? Like wisdom, all these virtues, all this kind of stuff. And even if you think, sorry, just before you continue, because I think it's a good point. Even think about music. Like you're a musician, I'm a musician. When you make the best stuff, is it coming from you, or you allowing this thing to come through? Pride will tell 100%. You that I'm creating this. I am a musical genius. It's like, no, you're a conduit, dude. Calm down. You know what I mean?
100%. No, 100%. And that's actually a pretty big deal. Like even some of the worst music I've ever made has been me sitting down and sort of being like, I shall force the song to be good.
Yeah, me too.
My will. And then I like ritualize, and it's like, my will shall create a good song. It's just a shit song. It's just like, there's no way around it.
That's the Satanist version of making music. And I will will myself to make this masterpiece.
And like Jung would then suggest that, and it's a very, very powerful point, that if you can find yourself embracing Christ and sitting down with Jesus and allowing the symbol to soak into you and marrying your identity to him, and it's an act of submission. You give your will over to him, and you kind of obey this and all this type of stuff. That's going to actually set you up. Most times it's going to set you up for positions of decent health. Like it's going to help you live well. It really will. Yes. And there's copious amounts of evidence. You meet a lot of Christians who genuinely do this, and oftentimes they're just very, like, a lot of things go right for them. Not all of them. There's a lot of Christians with a lot of bullshit in their heads, and 100%.
And let's just say that there definitely is that kind of bigoted, judgmental kind of Christian, but they're not really following it to, like, with all their heart, you know what I mean? Like, because a lot of Christians kind of they're just Christians because their parents were Christians, and they're just kind of repeating the same stuff without actually understanding the profundity of the theology or something like that. That's why I think the more potent Christians are usually those who come to it later in life, especially that lost sheep parable. Like me, I went through every single, like, dude, I read the Quran before I read the Bible for the first time. I read the Gospel of Thomas before reading this stuff. I went to Gnosticism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Satanism, all this, atheism, all this kind of stuff. So, yeah. You have like a bigger, because I kind of understand, and I have empathy and compassion, and it gives you a broader perspective versus just repeating what you've just been told, you know what I mean? Because I have that very rebellious nature of, like, I'm not going to believe this just because some dude told me it's true. But once you find it out yourself and you give your all to it, that's when the fruits really come. And I even experimented, because I've kind of been dabbling with Christianity for the last few years, but I kind of closeted, just didn't make any videos about it. And then once I started kind of following this...
Closeted Christian, eh?
Yeah, I was, for sure. And I was like kind of... and I haven't even talked about this on my channel too much, so a lot of this is kind of new, but I kind of was following these Christian virtues, and I was already... like with Jordan Peterson, for example, he was like my gateway drug into Christianity, or back into Christianity. And so I started to kind of follow these virtues, these Christian principles and stuff like that, without ever talking about it on my channel. And then you'll see, I can even go back to my videos and people will be like, Tom, you look so like wise and grounded, and man, you look really happy, you're glowing. But then as soon as you say like, oh yeah, actually I was following Christian principles, bigot, you horrible, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And then the kind of anti-Christian kind of attitude comes along. But it's just funny. I have proof. You can go back to my videos and watch people, their genuine reactions to how I'm kind of presenting myself. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's funny.
And this is the thing that's precisely what I'm talking about, is like installed within the symbol of Christ is, and like within Jesus himself, the living entity who lives in the astral plane, is the like these eternal principles, like there is these things, and you bind your identity to him, and it gives you access to these. Like you can just sit down and use him as a very grounded and easy way for you to constantly install this stuff into your life. And then what's weird is, because this is just correct, like because Christians got something correct, they got plenty wrong, but they got this correct. Christ got this stuff right. Humility, sincerity in behavior, purposeful speech, purposeful
loving your enemies. That was a very new
100%.
that was radical at that time, because it was like, yes, you may have heard love your neighbor, but I also say love your enemy as well.
Yeah, and this leads to health. It leads to quite a lot of health in many different ways. And this is the Jungian argument 101. It would suggest that, like, listen, like your goal out here is not to be some ideological, I got the whole stuff sorted out, I've got the perfect ideology and all this type of stuff. Your goal is that you want to be fucking happy, isn't it? Like, that's what you want. You want to be happy. And, Christ.
But you want happiness to be a byproduct of living a good life. Because I feel like if that's your ultimate goal, being happy, then you're going to be attached to worldliness and feeling good. And then that can kind of lead into problems.
Fair enough. But you get my general point.
I 100% get what you're saying. I just wanted to put that.
You want to live well.
Nuance out there. You want to live well. Yeah. You want to have a peaceful life, live a good life. Exactly. Yeah. I think, but again, we're talking about the meanings of word changing, right? Because what happiness, or what people perceive what happiness is feeling good, which is feeling pleasurable. So that's what. Yeah, hedonism. Exactly, hedonism.
I'm happy because I have Pornhub. You're like, I don't know about that, bro.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy. Yes.
I don't know, bro. I don't know. Blowing your load 6 times a day.
I'm pretty happy when I inject heroin. I'm pretty happy. Yeah. That's a nice tingling feeling.
But that's sort of it, is that you want to live well. You want to live in a life of dignity, and you want to live a life that 100%. Might give you flashes of happiness as well.
And not just for yourself, for your community, and that's very important, not having that selfish, as long as I'm happy. You hear that term, as long as you're happy. But in contrast to what? Yeah,
well, and that's like you're wired to the people around you, and like there's, as Jesus himself said, there's no greater sacrifice than a man who lays his life down for his friends. Like there is that type of vibe as well. And I think all of this stuff is really, really important, because what you're basically coming in contact with is the kind of questions of, all right, how do I go towards this type of life? How do I live well? That's really the big question. And of course, Jung would say one of the most direct access points for you that comes from your tradition is the symbol of Christ. And the problem with this is that if you want to go against that, you want to break away from that, you're going to have a reactionary identity by default, like Marxism, Satanism, and Nietzscheanism, fucking atheism, liberalism. None of these things, I'm afraid to say, offer you a firm, clear, well-tested identity of positivity like Christianity does. Like Christ is the symbol of this character. Like you be like Christ and you'll live well, and lots of virtues will come with it. Liberalism doesn't have this. Nietzsche doesn't have this. Nietzsche maybe has like the flicker of the Ubermensch there, and you can start to think to yourself, what might that mean? But it's still young. It's still fresh.
Did Nietzsche coin nihilism?
We'll talk about that in a sec if you wish.
Okay. So I'm getting ahead of myself here. We'll finish off with nihilism, because actually we got an announcement that we're going into lockdown 11:59 p.m. today. So I got to and it's late, so I got to enjoy my last few hours of freedom. Friends are coming over and stuff. Yeah, dude, it's crazy. But
how long is the lockdown on for?
Well, they say 5 days, but it's always longer. Every time they say just a week. Actually 2 weeks. Actually 3 weeks. So who knows?
Jesus, man, rolling lockdowns, man. Fucking hell.
I know.
It's gonna be the buzz now for the rest of the humanity's history. So you have that assertive identity, that positive identity, that experience of like, all right,
Christ offers you a very clear picture of someone you can be. And who do you have in Marxism? You have the comrade. Who do you have in liberalism? You have the, you have the snotty cappuccino drinking
the hipster friggin'
the hipster, you know.
The hipster,
who do you have in atheism? A guy with his arguments that are all straight. The guy with the arguments, like that type of stuff.
And it's funny with atheism because it's like they don't even have a position. Their whole position is like a negation. They're just trying to tear down your building instead. And then it's like, well, what do you believe? Well, actually, I don't believe anything, but I just want to destroy and prove that your ideology is wrong. But it's like, but what are you gonna replace it with, dude? Like, at least have some sort of a solution, you know?
That's just such an important thing to see, because this is really what I'm talking about, you know. And as I said, like we can talk about Neitzsche. Anybody listening, like Tom, you know, like is able to sit here and talk to me. We can talk about Christianity. He'll listen to me talk about the exact opposite and go for the Nietzscheism side of things. I'm not trying to shill an ideology here. I'm just trying to point out the obvious facts. And Jung noticed this stuff too. All of the atheism is a negation. It doesn't offer you an affirmative, positive vision of an identity, the way that you can live well. Whereas Christianity does. No matter what the problems you have with it, it does give you that. And it's very clear and firm. Islam gives you that. They give you Muhammad. That's very clear and firm. Judaism sort of doesn't give you that. That's actually one of Judaism's sort of moanings, is that they're waiting for a Mashiach.
Well, I feel like Christians are the real Jews anyway, because they kind of follow the story. I know that's very controversial to say, but well, come on, man. Jesus is all over the Old Testament. But anyway, we'll
digress. We'll talk about the kind of comparative religions later. But Buddhism gives you that. Buddhism gives you Buddha. And for example, a lot of people who break from Christianity end up becoming Buddhists because Buddhism is the only thing that we really are able to tolerate, because we can't be Muslims. No one wants to be a Muslim because it's an intolerant Abrahamic religion. So they all go to Buddhism and they're like, oh, I want to be like Buddha and all this type of stuff. But atheism doesn't have this. As I said, Marxism doesn't have this.
Buddhism was my first kind of Eastern spirituality gateway. That's what I would have identified as. So I did the silent meditation retreats, Thailand, meditating every single day, the learning about the Four Noble Truths. Oh, dude. I went balls. When I go into something, I go balls deep. I go 100%. See if it works. But I would say that where Buddhism reached its limit for me personally was when I went into existentialism, and it just made it worse because you just fall further into the abyss. But that's a different, that's a different topic.
Neitzsche called Buddhism a nihilist religion. Actually, it's
practical nihilism or spiritual nihilism, but it has its uses. Like, I'm not just knocking on it. I'm just pointing out the limits for me personally. It reached like a point where I was like, it's not helping me anymore.
And specifically, like, the thing I would be saying, of course, is that idea of the affirmative identity, the clear symbol that it can offer you to bring you towards living well. And so, for example, Buddha would do that for you. Christ would do that for you. There's the Marxian comrade doesn't really do that. The Nietzschean Ubermensch, it's not quite ready yet. It's not quite there. Although that's forming. Maybe it will become something.
Or the new internet atheists type.
Yeah, the internet, the Redditor,
Yeah, the Redditor. Yeah, exactly.
the critical rationalist. The critical rationalist. Like, that's not, you can't build a society on a bunch of people who are running around being critical rationalists.
I went to Oxford University and I find out that religion is a bunch of poppycock. You believe in a sky daddy? How preposterous. Yes.
Yeah, and this is it, and like that's not that just doesn't help. It doesn't show us anything. It doesn't show us how to struggle with the ways of life. This is why Jordan Peterson did it so well.
But a good thing, I just want to say one positive thing about atheism, instead of just crapping on it completely, is that it definitely forced the Christians or the theists in general to step up their game and be more critical and able to argue better and understand their own religion. You know what I mean?
Yes, 100%.
C.S. Lewis, he was an atheist for 20 years. Some of the most powerful Christians are the ones who've been atheists for so long. The skeptics.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. You get that a lot, actually. You get the reformed people who've explored the hell and the reactions and the adversary, and then they come back to this. And I guess not even making a comment about the movements in general, but just looking at this very big first principle that Jung would talk about, that affirmative identity is literally everything. Like, if something doesn't offer you this, what are you doing? Like, how is it going to help you otherwise? It's just going to offer you a sort of miasma of conceptual abstractions, but it's not going to give you this firm way that you can conduct yourself forward. For example, with Marxism, a philosophy that did politically take over and create something and offered people a very low resolution image of a messiah, which was the comrade, the persona of equality, but it just didn't work long term. The Russians puked it out. Their immune system said no. They said no. It's not deep enough. It's not real. It doesn't speak to my struggles. It doesn't speak to who I am enough. And so they went through getting butchered by, like, you know, they got destroyed by their tyrannical Bolshevik government, and then they got like a bureaucracy marred in on top of them and a management state put together that humiliated them and put them down and made them feel terrible. And eventually their immune system just said, fuck this isn't real. And 70 years later, the whole thing just implodes because it's bullshit. It doesn't offer people a firm identity. And then, of course, on top of that, the whole ideology itself just had its weaknesses and all these type of things. And this is the sort of question you should always be auditing what you're looking at with these type of things. Like, how does this stuff lead you towards something firm? And so
what's the end game, right?
Yeah. And Jung would say, from a position of sort of and like a very conservative position, is that, listen, whatever's happening in the 20th century or 21st century, like, we're going through this religious buffet, this ideological buffet, but you want to audit all of the things that you put at your feet for this specific thing, because it's not like most people are going to fuck themselves up if they try to choose some type of niche religion. As a reaction,
the abyss.
If you want to live well, you might be better off sitting down and just going for Christ if you're Western. And maybe you can try Buddhism if you want, but understand that it's not really you. Like, that's something from the East. You can try Islam if you want, because it does have a Messiah, but it's not really you either. And you've got to kind of sit down and say, well, what am I? And what's that sort of thing going from there?
Muhammad wouldn't be a good example to strive towards. You know what I mean? Because he wasn't like a perfect being.
Well, you could argue, like, I think Muhammad has many, many virtues that Christianity lacks. Like, this is where, you know, I'll say some jarring things.
Oh shit! All right, yeah, go on.
Because you know, Islam speaks to male instincts very strongly. Like, there's Christianity was in many senses a more feminine religion, and it's seen that way even by Islam. It was like many.
Do you think that's the case? Because even I look at Christianity like a very masculine kind of spirituality, and I feel like that's part of the reason why it gets so attacked. I feel like that the destruction of the family, the nuclear family, that masculinity, that authority, rules. I
don't think that it's like shall I say, like a completely feminine without any masculine features. I would say it more like it definitely leads towards feminine. Like, for example, like, think about it in the simplest terms possible.
Like love and forgiveness. Is that what you're talking about? Like these kind of virtues?
A beautiful young guy who's got a great, perfect heart gets unjustly. He's like, think of it. It's like the religion for a mother whose son was killed by war or killed by the society or killed unjustly. It's a religion of pity. It's a religion of sorrow. It's a religion of forgiveness and sadness and tragedy and social injustice and disempowerment. Like, the hero dies in Christianity, and it causes, like, the hero dies, and it causes the people to turn around and say, no more. We're going to stand up in a social justice movement and fight against this corrupt system. And this very much suits feminine instincts, because the sort of story. Awesome. So basically, as you know, the society falls apart, and Christianity is like the sort of social justice movement to change it. Whereas you could look at the Islam, and what you have in Islam is you have a man, 40 years old. So he's an older guy, first of all. He's a successful businessman, and he doesn't like the society he's around, and he becomes this great conquering organizer. He goes around and he organizes all the local tribes, and he gets them sorted out in an army, and they fight these one-on-one battles, and Muhammad wins many of them. Muhammad organizes an army and then goes out and fights, and fighting is no fucking joke, man. Like, to actually run an army and fight, that's a big fucking deal. He goes out and he fights, he conquers, he succeeds, he builds up an army and wins, and then he goes and he conquers large amounts of territory, and then he puts all this political organization together, dies himself, and then after that, his army's momentum continues, and they just fucking conquered. They almost conquered the entire Middle East immediately after.
Isn't that how the Crusades started? It was like a reaction against Islam taking over, and like from what I heard, I don't know, because I'm sure there's different ways of looking at this, but from the source that I read, it said that they were basically attacking and pillaging for like 400 years before the Catholics were like, all right, we're going to do something about this. You know, it took them 400 years to actually react and, like, you know, because obviously
Well,
in Christianity, violence is a sin. You're not supposed to murder people. Love your enemies.
Exactly.
So it's like a bind, but it's like, yeah, but they're killing us. You know what I mean? What are we supposed to do? Yeah.
This was one of Christianity's problems, but more than anything, like the Catholic Church was after collapsing at this point, so it had no power. Like
right, and that was with the schism, right, between Orthodoxy and Catholicism. I think during the Third or Fourth Crusade, as far as I'm aware.
You had the Western Roman Empire was a mess at that point, and
yes.
and Islam ascended, and Islam first of all took over the Sassanids, who were ancient Persians. These are very interesting people, by the way, but Islam just like the story of Islam conquering these. This is why Islam is actually such a badass religion in many ways, because, for example, they would confront this massive ancient empire, the Sassanid Empire, the Persians. And the Persians, for example, were Xerxes in 300. Like, these are the same guys. And the Sassanids and the Muslims would meet each other. And the Muslims were basically like a load of, they would have been, how would I give you an image properly? Like, they lived in the desert, they're desert warriors. They lived in tents. They're nomads. They would have been in like the first guys traveling around the Australian outback or the American cowboys, like that type of character.
Yeah, right.
And they show up and they're fighting against the Xerxes massive, super organized civilization. And many of these battles went down to one-on-one battles. So it would be like our best fighter versus your best fighter. And whoever wins.
It's like a samurai fight. Almost
like a samurai fight.
Yeah.
And the Muslims won almost every single one of those. Like, you read through the history and it's like, and then the Muslims general fought against the other general, and you're like, oh no, the poor Sassanids, here we go again. And
so they were beasts, They were pretty. So that they embodied that warrior spirit,
100%. They embodied that champion. And think about it, like, Islam is like a religion for men. It's like a very, very geared towards male instincts.
It is. Multiple wives. I mean, hey man, that sounds, it's appealing.
Exactly. It's so much shocking.
Slaves and all that kind of stuff.
It's so much shocking. Like, it's like a very purified expression of that, and like, it has its downsides, of course. It lacks the feminine.
No, but it's cool.
Touch,
Thank you for balancing my perspective on this, because I was going a little bit too tough on that.
No, it's fair enough.
It's good to look at the, at least the virtue side of it. And, one of my best friends is Muslims, man. I like some of the nicest people I've ever met. It's just more, because I don't make it about people. It's more about the ideology. Like, does this make coherent sense, But
it's like different strokes for different folks, because you can choose Muhammad as the way forward, and he will give you, like, he won't give you what Christ gives you, but he'll give you a vision of I should be patriarch of the household. I should be like, there's warrior instincts in it. There's very, very harsh intolerance in it. Like, it's extremely intolerant.
Like, if you don't agree with it, if you're not a believer, you're dead. Get out of here.
Yeah. And there's upsides and downsides to stuff like that. That means that it's not necessarily open to innovation the way that the Christian world is, but also it's not open to attack the way the Christian world is. Like, the Christian world is very vulnerable for, like, for example, Christianity permits free-thinking liberalism, and then liberalism evolves into this horrible reactionary thing that tries to destroy Christianity. So Christianity's like looseness, because the Catholic Church
it's like the spoiled kid being like, "Fuck you, Dad." It's like, dude, I gave you everything.
Exactly. Whereas if that dad was Muslim, he'd basically, like, the kid would be like, "Oh, I want to try explore this interesting idea." Like, shut the fuck up and just stay on track. Stay on track and control yourself and discipline and all this. It's intolerance, and there's power to that. There's downsides, of course, but there's power to that. Islam,
you're right. Yeah,
it presents many of those things. And then, of course,
sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to finish your thought, and then we'll finish off with Neitzsche. Maybe we'll just touch on the nihilism, because I'm sure we could make like a 2-hour podcast purely on nihilism. And of course, you're always welcome back on the podcast, but I always enjoy this show.
I would actually love to do that. I'd love to do that. That'd be great. But I guess I can dive into Neitzsche.
And I'm going to go on lockdown, so I'll be free as a bird again.
Nice. To give you a clear sort of overview, so I'm sort of suggesting that messianic figure at the center of these ideologies really gives you a way to look at living well. You can take all sorts of different flavors. Christ in the West is a good option, and when you see people embrace him, they tend to do quite well, especially if they do it in a conscious way. They really understand that they're
properly
like
not judge. Even then, like, don't judge others. Only God can judge. So as soon as you're judging, and then you have like this self-righteousness, you're already falling away from how Christ would have done it. You know what I mean?
100%. And then, for example, if you want to choose Buddhism, like it will give you many virtues, such as temperance. It will give you a rational detachment.
It will give you psychology kind of training, you know, like to train your brain and to focus and all this kind of stuff. Oh, dude, I got a lot of beautiful, amazing things from Buddhism, and the amazing people. I get it, but there's also what I see, or my it's not even with Buddhism. It's the kind of white New Age hippie view and romanticization of Buddhism. You know what I mean? Like they've done some dark shit too, man. There's this movie, Martin Scorsese movie called Silence, and it talks about the Japanese Buddhists killing and crucifying Christians and basically forcing them to stamp on Jesus, and it was horrible. You know what I mean? So it's like we've all done our fish. We all have blood on our hands. Is the point I'm trying to make here.
Absolutely. Like Buddhism is not exclusively non-violent despite the way it's sold. Like it's a very specific religion. It's saying that samsara is essentially the world. Samsara is evil, is hell. Like reality is hell. And,
seems like Gnosticism, like there's some parallels there, that matter is evil, right? Yeah.
Very, very close. Well, I guess this will give us a good kind of springboard into Neitzsche, because, all right, the image of Buddha is that reality it's just fucked. It's just broken. And the goal, and think about this. So what Muhammad basically says to you, what Jesus says to you is that we need to create the kingdom of heaven, and the way you do that is through me. And so you give your heart over to me, and I will turn you into a virtuous person. And if everybody in this society gives their heart over to Jesus and identifies as Christian, we all personify these virtues, and our society will move from being a horrible barbaric society to a more beautiful society. Right. Essentially the kingdom,
the body of Christ, right? That's what it is. Like we're his bride, he's the head, and we're the body, you know, kind of living out his virtues. Yeah. Yeah.
Muhammad, very, very similar, saying that, all right, through my warrior instincts, if you follow me and sacrifice yourself for me and sacrifice yourself for Islam, and sacrifice yourself for Allah, we will conquer, reshape the world, and bring Allah into the world and change this decrepit, sinful, atheist or pagan world and redeem it into something beautiful, the kingdom of heaven again. Allah's kingdom, though, so a slightly different one. Right. And then with the Buddhists, the same offer is sort of implicitly there. You're nirvana there, and it's nirvana. Now this is slightly different though, because basically Buddha says the entire world is hell. There's no point building a kingdom here. There's no point doing anything here. Yes, because it's samsara. It's hell. It's a shit show. It's
everything's transient. Right? Everything dies. Right. As soon as you attach yourself to anything of this world, you're gonna suffer. Right. That's why life is suffering. That's the first noble truth. And you try to cease that, and it's the abandonment of the personality, though. That's where it can go. Like you said, you know, it's nihilism in a sense, because you're abandoning your personality, the self. It's all an illusion.
More than anything, you're abandoning the goal. Like there's no kingdom. Like in Christianity, there is an offer of a kingdom. In Islam, there is an offer of a kingdom, a better future. Yes. All right. And that motivates you, because that's not nihilistic. That's the opposite of nihilistic.
And practical. It's because it kind of reconciles the abstract heavenly realms, but also the down to earth practical realities. You know what I mean? So it's a reconciliation 100%. of heaven and earth.
100%. Now, the thing with Buddhism is that it says there is no kingdom, there is no salvation, there is none of this stuff. The only thing that you can do is you can somehow learn to cessate the fire that burns through you, that drives you towards contributing towards samsara. Like a large part of you is made up of energy and the forces of the instincts that create samsara, that create hell. Like you are the demon in this world. Yes. You're the torturing soul. You're evil in that type of sense. And if you want to fix the world, if you want to make the world a better place, you need to detach, cessate, liberate, and let go of the whole thing and kind of step outside of it. Now, this does amazing things for people, because there is wisdom to that. There is wisdom to liberating yourself from the unconscious forces of the instincts, but it ultimately doesn't give you a direction, doesn't give you a future, doesn't give you a purpose. Yes. Now, Neitzsche, Schopenhauer read a lot of Buddhism and turned this basically into a German version of this, with Schopenhauer's philosophy, where he said that the world is will and representation. The world is driven by this energy and this will, and the only thing that you can do, the only moral thing that you can do, is kill that will inside yourself. Now, Schopenhauer suggested what you should do is take that will and burn it out making art. Wagner reads this and creates the Wagnerian music that becomes really, really famous. And Neitzsche, of course, was friends with Wagner. And Neitzsche reads a lot of Schopenhauer. And Neitzsche picks up on this. And Neitzsche reads through this and basically is reading this thing saying that you've got this energy inside of you and you should just burn it out and let it be destroyed. And there is no point to anything else. The only thing you can do is just burn out that stuff you have in the most noble way possible. And Neitzsche sees this as nihilistic. He sees this as a very serious problem. So he sees a couple of things going on. First of all, Schopenhauer is very, very famous. Much of the upper class read Schopenhauer and saw him as like a actually quite accurate way of seeing the world. A lot of them stopped being Christian at this point. And so he saw this problem where there was the breakdown of the belief in the Christian world. Like people didn't, the kingdom of heaven that Christ promised never came. And Christ never came again. And a lot of people started to look at each other and be like, this is bullshit, guys. Like this isn't working. Like, all right, it's a cool idea and it gives us an identity and it keeps the plebs in order, but it's not leading to the future. And I don't think it's going to work. And so a lot of them started to look for alternate perspectives, and they come across things like Buddhism or Schopenhauer, true Buddhism, and all sorts of things. Like there was all sorts of stuff going on. This is where Aleistor Crowley was active at this time as well. He
Taoism as well. That's a pretty. I feel like it's a fuller expression of that Eastern spirituality. I feel like they get closer to that.
100%. Yeah, that's a pretty cool religion. And then basically Neitzsche sits down with all this stuff and he sees that because Christianity failed, it no longer offers people a vision of a future that is purposeful, because people just don't take it serious. Like the kingdom, it's been 2,000 years. The kingdom of God never came. Like, I'm sorry. Like it's basically like, I'm sorry, but it would have happened. Well, so with Islam, you know, in order for people to remain motivated to trust Muhammad, there has to be this feeling that Allah is conquering and moving forward and creating a beautiful kingdom. And the same with Christ. Like, in order for people to take Christ seriously, they have to feel that like Christianity is creating civilization that's world renowned and good and powerful. And after 2,000 years, it just doesn't hit the same way, because people are sort of like, I don't know, guys, like, this isn't innovating. We're not progressing. Like, Christianity isn't fixing anything anymore. It's stale, it's old, all these type of things. And so a lot of the European upper class are feeling this. And there's all this stuff like, well, like this fucking God guy, like if he, like, what's going on with him? And so Neitzsche noticed that God is not taken serious anymore. God is dead. The power of the symbol of Christ begins to lose its sort of energy, its charge. It starts to drop in power. It doesn't, people don't take it as serious anymore. They don't.
It's interesting because all of this is prophesized in Revelation. Anyway. So it's like, it's actually all part of the story. It's supposed to happen. It's supposed to fall away. And I feel like that's why it's coming back, you know, with these hard times, people kind of finding Christ again. And it's happening.
Maybe, I'm not going to say anything about that, but maybe that's an interesting thing to explore. Nonetheless, where Neitzsche was at this point is he was looking at this. He was seeing then that what people are going to do to replace Christianity is they're going to take on a European Buddhism, basically Schopenhauer, which is a sort of belief that the world is hell and evil and there's no real escape. And the only thing you can really do is you can take the energies that nature has plugged inside of you and manifest them as some type of beautiful decadent art, which is basically like the finale to the world and Western civilization. And so he saw that was ascending very strongly, a European Buddhism, or what he called the ascent of nihilism. Now, his big project is he's sitting down and looking at this. He's basically seeing that European Buddhism and that nihilism doesn't offer us a firm vision of the future. It doesn't offer us a kingdom. It doesn't offer us a Messiah. It offers none of that stuff. And so he sits down with this and he says, the problem we have is that we're not going to take Christianity seriously. We can't. It's psychologically dead to us, right? And that's a real good critique and problem. And the replacement we're going to put in is sterile and nihilistic itself. It's European Buddhism, and it doesn't offer us a clear vision of Messiah. So what we need to do, or what I am going to do, someone has to do, and I guess no one's going to do it, so I will do it. What I have to do is we have to sit down and say to ourselves, what could we create that would be capable of psychologically replacing this? What would have enough charge? And his vision was that the thing that would drive us is a vision of a new man. And a new man would be a man based on evolution, basically, that would be higher than what we are. Something to give us a vision of something positive, with virtue, with strong vitality, strong character, essentially like a sort of bodybuilder combined with a CEO or something like that. Yes. And we got to aim for something.
You
And so
got
he starts to
hierarchy, meaning.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%, exactly that thing, exactly that thing.
Yeah.
And so he starts to concept this as like, all right, we need a vision of something that's higher than mankind right now, and this would be an overman, a superman, an ubermensch, a better version of ourselves.
Right.
And think about it like in the self-help context. Like, I imagine myself, I want to be my better version of myself. Deep down, there's a better version of myself I want to be, and this is precisely what Neitzsche was talking about. That take that whole instinct inside the guy who listens to Elliot Holtz or me or whoever and wants to become a better version of himself through working out, through learning.
I'm interviewing Elliot next week.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah,
amazing. Exactly. And he has that, like, Elliot's a great example, someone who wants to improve in all these different ways.
Yes.
And leading you towards a better version of yourself. And then Neitzsche would sit down explicitly and say to you, okay, right, how, if we did that on a societal scale and we got an image of that self-development guy, that improver, if you know what I mean, that would be the Ubermensch, like the end result. If
That
all
Jesus
of us,
one?
yes,
Jesus, that meme?
Jesus on the cross with the muscles. Jesus returns and he's fucking jacked and on steroids. He's breaking the cross off. He's like, fuck you, Romans.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's it. Like, that's the sort of vision. You know, I don't want to say that like the Ubermensch is a gym bro, but like it's a sort of part of it. It's like vital, healthy, intelligent, strong, and competent, capable, all these type of things. And
that's why physical health is so important, man. You know what I mean? That's the problem with Gnosticism, or I kind of find the problem with, is that it's that kind of detachment of your physical needs, but then this physical reality, it's important, man. You know what I mean? Like, once you deny it, then you abandon logic, you abandon your physical health. It's important to, you know, lift some weights, eat healthy, go out for walks. Like, this is all physical activities, but it's all tied into your spiritual health.
And this is why stuff like Neitzsche would be so adamant about including that in a new vision, because, for example, things like Muhammad and Christianity, these people didn't need advice on physical health because, you know, they, like, Mohammedans lived in the desert. Christians were like, you know, barbarian Europeans running around forests. They didn't need an exercise regime. But we live in an era now where there's no environmental pressure. There's no jungle. There's no desert. We live in fucking cities. So we need to start like forming a religion of, or like a worldview or whatever. I don't want to, like, an ideology, whatever you want to call it, where the centerpiece is actually pushing us towards self-imposed pressure, self-imposed environmental stress that causes us to evolve, because we can't have something that lets us away with that anymore, because it's not going to work, because then we'll all degrade and become decrepit golems, and there won't be a beautiful world anymore. We will fail because we've removed this type of stress. And his proposition then, his Ubermensch proposition, is anti-nihilistic by definition. It's a suggestion that if we get this vision, this thing, it's a good answer to the very complex problem of God is dead, Christ is no longer psychologically charged. The replacement is European Buddhism, Schopenhauerian nihilism. And we don't want that. We're not pessimists. We're not nihilists. We want to think about a positive future and a creative, assertive, vital future. Hence, I give you the Ubermensch. He is that future. He is that way of seeing things. And it is like a little bit LARPy, and I understand it, but it's like actually not, in its comprehensive take, it's a fucking good perspective, man. It's a really, like, for that man.
I'll check it out. Yeah, well, I'll keep in touch, and you know, give us the recommendation of what book.
Sweet. Well, if you want, like, we could do a big long talk about nihilism and Neitzsche, because because I want to get into nihilism, but I got to go, and this is like, man, I feel like we're just dipping our toe into these waters, you know, and like nihilism, relativism. Because even God is dead is mathematically it's the same as saying I am God, right? If there is no God, then we're all gods. And that's precisely what he says.
And same with all truth is relative, but even that has a logical fallacy, because if all truth is relative, is that true? Because you're making an absolute claim about truth being relative. You know what I mean?
Yes, 100%.
Like,
100%.
even to say there is no truth, again, you're saying, is that true? Yes, well then, you know what I mean? Like, it's the abandonment of logic, man. Like, it really, and it goes deep. And nihilism has like different this book that I just told you about, Father Seraphim Rose, it goes into the 4 stages of dialectic nihilism. Dude, you're gonna absolutely love it. I know that this is right up your alley, and maybe you can even get into it a little bit, and we can discuss it next time.
Awesome. Let's do it, man. Let's do it. That would be a really, really cool thing to go into, is like the Nietzschean question, because it's something that people don't talk about well because they don't understand it. But precisely what I'm talking about here is a great foundation. Like if you look at the religions and look at the Messiah they offer and think through what it is and take out the ideology and don't react emotionally to it and just look at what it is, it shows you a very, very beautiful and interesting picture of human history comparatively. And then you start to understand exactly what Neitzsche was doing. And then once you start to jump into this, like it's a very, very cool question. But I know you got to go, so maybe we could call it a wrap at that.
100%. It's a good prequel, you know. So I'm sure people are listening are like, no, keep going. We will very soon. Maybe next week. I don't know if whenever you're free.
Sure, man. Yeah, I've got my schedule pretty well sorted out now, so I could do next week if you want.
Beautiful, man. Yeah, we'll keep in touch, and I want to learn about this. What's his name? The German guy.
Schopenhauer.
Schopenhauer.
And then you have Neitzsche.
Okay, yeah. So Neitzsche I'm familiar with. Schopenhauer I haven't delved into, so I'm looking forward to it.
Schopenhauer is bleak, bro. Schopenhauer is a pessimist, and he's one of the best writers there ever was. He's so good at articulating his thoughts, but he's fucking bleak, though.
Yeah, that's fine. Bleak. Dude, it's fine. I can handle it.
He's like the black metal. He's like the black metal of philosophy.
Right. Oh, interesting. All right, I'm excited, man. I'm excited to continue talking about this. Thank you, brother. Always a pleasure. We went through some very interesting routes today. So
yeah, 100%. Thank you very much, man, for having me on. It's a pleasure as always, and I look forward to it. We'll sink our teeth into old nasty Neitzsche.
100%. All right, guys. So I'll leave the links to Uberboyo's channel below the description, and yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and yeah, we'll catch you guys next time.
Talk to you later, people. Bye.
All right, brother. I'm gonna go now. Always a pleasure. Really enjoyed this conversation, man. A lot to mull over in my mind, so it's good.
Beautiful. Good stuff. Let's definitely have a chat about that stuff. That'll be awesome. And man, yeah, good luck with the fucking lockdown. Holy fuck.
Yeah. Anyways, it is what it is, I guess. So.
All right, man. I'll talk to you later, man.
Yeah, man. Enjoy your day. Peace.
Bye.
Much love.